Welcome back. I hope you guys are doing awesome. The guy that wrote this book, you could say he specializes in war, but specifically has a lot of years of experience and information in the Middle East. I'm not saying that what we're presenting here is true and a fact. I'm saying that it is a representation of this author's belief. And I view it more like an experiment. I take some of the ideas, flip it around my experience, see if I think it's true or not. So I encourage you all to do the same. In the foreword it says, all three wars were lost before the first shots were fired, not on the battlefield, but at the strategic level of war. And before we go any further, a big theme in this book seems to be what we understand, what we define as confirmation bias. That the United States and military leaders have a certain lane of thinking. Again, that's the way those soldiers and leaders were trained. That's how we do war. That's how we did it before. That's how we're going to do it now, and that's how we're going to do it in the future. And that the new information that they were receiving, they seemed to have, so is said in here, a confirmation bias, that because that's the way that they were trained and that's the way that they read history and that's the way that we understand it, that it's like a lens, like a porthole, like you're in the bottom of a ship and you look out a porthole. It's like that porthole has certain fragments and dirty spots that don't allow you to see the picture or the facts clearly. And so what happens is that we all look through this porthole of military training and American culture and the way our society and culture is, and that they seem to pull facts that uniquely helped fit their way of viewing things, that led to a confirmation bias that essentially ignored major significant facts. And to add to, I was an infantry ground soldier and did some work with projects like building roads, but it seems a good chunk of this book is at the super ultra high levels, such as the Joint Chiefs of Staff type of level. And we'll work to bring this down to our level, our more ground level of understanding and application. But again, what he's saying is that we had such a catastrophically skewed view of the facts that fit this confirmation bias that we were literally wrong from the get-go in our whole strategy of doing war. Okay. Back to the forward. All three wars were lost before the first shots were fired, not on the battlefield, but at the strategic level of war. The United States interpreted all three conflicts as insurgencies, when in fact all three were civil wars in which the United States took a side. Success was never possible from the outset because none of these three countries were nations for which the majority of citizens were willing to fight and die. Nation building is a slow, evolutionary, internal process through which the political identity of the people within the country, rather the country's borders, matures over centuries to go beyond or transcend tribalism, secularism, and ethnic divides until it reaches a pervasive sense of nationhood. And again, I was not in Iraq, I was in Afghanistan, but there was absolutely this tribalism that if we wound up killing a cow like we did one time, one of the soldiers might have actually blown up the cow. But that little village then could get $2,500. But the problem was that then that elder or leader in that community would talk crap to the village next to them, and then the village next to them would be upset because they didn't get $2,500, but they couldn't understand or get beyond that we didn't kill their cow, so we didn't need to give them that $2,500. But again, most of Afghanistan is illiterate. Actually, in 2016-17, the literacy rate was reported at 34%, and has recently increased to 43%. But that many of these people were so poor and they had no education, they couldn't understand that simple construct that they weren't entitled to that $2,500. So we fast forward a little bit. Foreigners can build architecture, but they cannot build a nation. Extensive empirical data shows conclusively that there was no increase in local community support for Afghan government, for example, after the delivery of schools, roads, clinics, and so on by the counterinsurgents. We built it and they did not come. Furthermore, this data was available before, in bold letters, before the tactical clear, hold, and build was widely implemented at enormous cost in blood and treasure. money. The intent of this book is to break up the ice in conventional thinking, which again, we have this confirmation bias, and it's even in me, and it's hard to see outside of that because it's the way you're trained and acculturized, but we'll see what happens as we move through this. To break up the ice of conventional thinking, which has calcified the discussion of these issues into such predictable patterns, and to demonstrate that the outcomes in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan were in fact predetermined by immutable political and cultural imperatives before the first shots were fired. This book will show that these tragedies were avoidable. So I just wanted to give you a little taste of what is in store. I plan on making these into as small, compact little bites as possible and releasing them as quickly as possible. And again, not to don you with the truth or the information, it's just an added idea for you to consider, for you to take inside and reflect on and internally validate or deny, but also to reflect on the virtues that this kind of stirs up. Because for me, it tends to trigger the idea of humility, that I think I know what I know, and sometimes I and we can be pretty attached to what we know or what we think we know, and having the humility and even vulnerability and courage, because we can't be vulnerable or consider an outside opinion without being on some level vulnerable. But if we do vulnerability on purpose, it implies risk, which courage is required to overcome that risk and allow that new idea or new way of thinking, feeling, and being inside to tumble around and potentially beat up our old and maybe outdated beliefs. So truly, I approach this with a student or learner's mindset. I encourage you to do the same and to continue to reflect, what thoughts does this stir up in me? What emotions and what virtues are those things related to? So what do you think about this so far? Let me know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, because remember, at least I truly believe that veterans are the backbone, or at least a backbone, of the United States. And the United States is the backbone of the entire world. One great public speaker and business person said that if you change the United States, you change the entire world. I'm a firm believer of that, and we as veterans can connect with other veterans and help strengthen the veteran population, help strengthen that particular backbone, so we can do far greater things together and help not only Americans but humanity. Humanity is hurting, and here we are.